The assistance we have during worship for so many years, it was just human voices together, in key or otherwise. So we are now in part 2 of our Through the Bible series. I'm just going to say, if you weren't here last week, the intro here is going to be a little bit confusing. So I'm going to put everybody on the spot, and if you're able to stand, and we're going to go through all the things that we learned last week. So everybody, if you're able to stand, I'll lead you. And if you weren't here last week, just look at your neighbor and kind of move your arms around as vaguely as possible. All right, everybody ready? All right, creation, fall, flood, nations, Abraham, remember the map? Dead Sea, Jordan River, Sea of Galilee, Mediterranean, Israel. Now we get to the kids. Ishmael, Isaac, Esau, Jacob, Joseph, Egypt, Jews, Egypt. How long were they there? 400 years. Bondage. Who came? Moses. Let my people go. No. 10 plagues, Passover, Red Sea, Mount Sinai. You can have a seat. Good job. And so again, if you weren't here last week, I'm just going to give you a real quick recap. Here we go. There, just a few images. That's what you missed last week. Everybody got it? And if you missed one of these series and you want to know what it is that you missed, remember we do post everything on YouTube. We put it on Facebook. Take one of those cheat sheets you'll find in the back that has all the hand signs. Practice it with your kids. I've been doing it with Christine, and she's even asking us like in the van. She's like, "Dad, is this Esau?" And she'll go through it with us. You'll be amazed at what you'll remember doing this. And so we're going to continue today. So where we left off from last week, just to recap the whole thing, and if you weren't here, we're doing the hand signs. You feel silly doing it, but I guarantee you this will assist you in remembering these things. And what we're trying to do is help you get a grasp of the big picture. So when you go on your own and you read and you study these things, you say, "Oh, I know who Abraham is." Or, "Oh, I know, why they're wandering around in the middle of the desert." Okay, so we left off last week. God had promised Abraham, remember, that he would make his descendants a great nation. That happened. But they were in Egypt and they were living as slaves, so God brought them out of Egypt through the plagues and the Passover and the Red Sea. And he brings them now to Mount Sinai. And I drew this picture, all illustrations of mine as they are. He brings them to Mount Sinai to make his covenant with them. And covenant is like a very, very serious contract. And he sets out the terms with them. And so the reason why I drew it like this is God descends on the mountain. And it says that fire just consumes the top of the mountain. And all of the people, they hear the voice of God speaking. One of the few times you find this in the Bible. And every time that people hear the voice of God speaking in the Bible, they have one response, and that is to be terribly, terribly afraid. So Moses said, "I am afraid and trembling." So Mount Sinai. And there he gives them the law. So next time after Mount Sinai is law. All right, so law like you're holding the 10 Commandments right there in your hands. And so God gives the Israelites, you'll find this stated in the book of Exodus, some in Leviticus, some in Numbers, and again in Deuteronomy. But the law contains 612 commandments. The largest are the 10 Commandments. And if you have a hard time, I imagine not many of you go through and read the Old Testament law as like, "Oh, that's the scripture I need when I'm going through a hard time," or find it deep and meaningful. If you're having a hard time and you hit these sections of the Bible, here's an easy way to understand it, because later Jesus was asked about it, and he defined it as this. All of the laws given to the people of Israel fall into 2 categories. Every single commandment is either about loving God or loving your neighbor. You look at the Ten Commandments, and I put them up there just like that. They're in order, and the first 4 of them are about loving God. And then the next 6 are about loving your neighbor. You can go through every single law given. So we have Mount Sinai, law. And contained in the law is a description. You ever did this as a kid? Was it, here's a church, there's a steeple, open the doors. So we'll have that. The next signs are tabernacle and Levites and priests. Wiggle your fingers on the inside. If you've not done it as a kid, complicated stuff, right? So the tabernacle was essentially a tent, a portable temple that the people would carry around the desert with them. And it wasn't really special materials or anything like that. It was made with the stuff that they had. There's gold and silver on the inside and bronze and all of that. But what made it unique was that the presence of God was in the holiest place in the center of the tabernacle. And so later on, this is important because later on when you get to the Gospel of John, and it describes Jesus, it says, Jesus tabernacled with us. And so for the Jewish people reading that, looking back to the tabernacle, it's special because the Spirit of God lives in it. What a statement about Jesus. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us, tabernacled with us. Jesus was the presence of God living with us. We have everybody, Mount Sinai, law, tabernacle, people in it, Levites and priests. So at this point, the nation of Israel has 12 different tribes. Remember, Joseph, right, wasn't liked by his brothers. The 12 brothers, they become 12 tribes of the nation of Israel. One of those tribes, the Levites, is set apart. And they become the rough equivalent of pastors to the nation of Israel. It's the Levites' job to go around and teach people the laws of God. The priests are those who work specifically in the temple, and they're all Levites, and they do the offerings and the workings of the temple. So we have Mount Sinai, law, tabernacle, Levites and priests, and then the book of Leviticus is about 2 main things. Go offerings and feasts, like you're a waiter carrying out trays. I never carried them like this. I was a waiter for like 3 months. It was one of those things where you very, very clearly can tell that you're not cut out to do a job. I'm not cut out to be a waiter. So, Levites and priests, offerings, and feasts. So the book of Leviticus deals with offerings. People would bring their animal sacrifices in the temple, and feasts. How many of you, as an adult, have gone and traveled to a convention of some sort, a Christian convention? Raise your hand, I'm curious. I think that is something that is missing in our walk with God today. Now, youth groups generally do a good job of this. They have, we're getting ready to go to youth camp pretty soon here. Later in the fall, we'll have convention. And there's just a frequent yearly calendar of things that youth groups go and do. And there's something special about traveling to a place, setting aside that time for God, specifically adults. This was something that was a part of the law. It wasn't like even optional. Everybody, several times a year, would come together. They would celebrate the Passover and several other feasts that would just be a time of special devotion to God. So all of this is found in the books of the law. Let's stand up and we'll do those together, and then we'll get into the next part of the story. So if you're able to stand up, really easy. We'll start off with just 4 or 5 here. Where they start off, Mount Sinai, law, tabernacle, Levites and priests, offerings and feasts. Doing good. Have a seat. So the people spend this time at Mount Sinai. God tells them, here is what I want you to do. They're on the edge of the promised land. All of the promises more than 400 years ago God had made to Abraham is about to take place. And they're about to go in. They say, you know what, let's send in some spies and see what the land looks like. So the next sign is 12 spies. They send in representatives, 12 spies. They go into the land and they look at it. And they come back to the people and they say, it's great. This land is everything God promised it would be. There's all kinds of... We brought some back just to show you. Like your neighbor that has a good crop of zucchinis and brings some just to show you how big they are. They bring it back and they're like, look at these grapes. It's so odd. But here's the thing. We're terrified of the people living there. The spies come back and they say it's not only awesome, it's also guarded by people who made us feel like grasshoppers when we stood next to them. I don't think we can do this. And the people listen to the spies and they're terrified. What are we going to do? We can't go in and fight. They're giants. They've got like big walls. And we're a nation of slaves, and the people turn back. Which is amazing to me. Except that we do the same thing in our own lives. Because we look at these people like, what are you doing? God just defeated the empire of Egypt for you. You were the same people. You walked through the Dead Sea on dry land, right? Water standing on either side of you. And you don't think that God can somehow handle the next challenge He's put in front of you? But here's what we do. We come to a challenge in our life. A chasm has opened up in front of us. Some unforeseen difficulty has appeared in our lives. And what do we say? Where's God? How am I going to do this? And we ignore everything that came before that point in our lives. All of the trials that God has brought us through, and I'm just saying this, I do this. All of the trials that God has brought us through, and that's what God tells the people of Israel. Did you forget what I did for you? To bring you to this point. And so they come right up to the edge of the promises of God. They can see the land. They can see the fruit that it offers. They get scared and they turn back. And yet God is faithful. So after the 12 spies, God tells the people, you're so terrified of this, fine. Your kids will get it. And so what you're going to do is you're going to turn around. Did parents ever tell you that line? You better stop, I will turn this trip around. God turns the trip around. And He sends them, and He says, you're going to go wander in the desert until every last one of you dies. And everybody under that age, they're going to get the promise. And it's heartbreaking. Can you imagine what the next 40 years were like for the people? 40 years of being reminded of the reason that they're out there. And yet 40 years of God's continuing grace. He could have right at that moment killed every one of them. Yet God continues to feed them every morning. They wake up, there's manna on the ground. God continues to lead them. In fact, later on He tells them He makes sure that their sandals didn't wear out and their clothes didn't get tattered. And yet for 40 years, the next sign is wanders and dies. Now I'll just say this as I picture through the Bible. I can imagine if you're one of the younger generation and there's a handful of the older generation left. 40 years, maybe you were 10 when it happened, right? And I said, Mommy, why are we so scared? And now you're 50 years old and you're looking right at the last 5 people come on! I hate you, Grandpa! I'm just being honest. I don't know exactly what they said, but let's be real. You're waiting for the last 5 people to drop off so you can stop wandering around the desert. Trying to encourage them to go outside and play in a thunderstorm or something. All right, so after the 12 spies, The book of Numbers, by the way, is where we find this. 40 years wandering, and then they die. And then you get the second law, the book of Deuteronomy. So after they wander and die, you get this second law. And the book of Deuteronomy literally means second law. And this is Moses giving his final address to the people. Moses at this point is 120 years old. Yet he is still described as a man full of vigor and strength. So Moses gets up and he says, "You are about to now finally go in and possess the land that God promised you." And so he recaps the law, the Ten Commandments. What makes the book of Deuteronomy stand out, and if you want to understand the rest of the Old Testament, you look at the book of Deuteronomy and he sets out blessings and curses. He has them go, actually, and stand on two mountains. So everybody, you're going to stand on this mountain and shout out the blessings of following God's law. Everything that God had promised to do for them, he said, your cattle will not miscarry. You will defeat your enemies. I will bless you in every possible way. And then the people were going to go and stand on the other mountain, and they're going to shout the curses for not following the laws that set out. And it's pretty much the opposite. God says, I'm going to be against you in every possible way. Think of parents disciplining their kids. Maybe you start with a warning and then time out and things just escalate from there. God says, I'm going to warn you. And then you'll experience famines and droughts. You'll be defeated in battle. I will even bring on you the plagues that I brought on the Egyptians. The rest of the Old Testament is the working out of those blessings and curses. So you read the rest of the Old Testament, people are either following God's law or they're not. They're either being blessed or they're being cursed. And God presents the same choice to us today. So the people stood, they see the two mountains. He says, choose which one. I'm putting life and death before you. Choose which one you will follow. So we have Mount Sinai, we have the law, tabernacle, Levites and priests, offerings and feasts. The 12 spies, they wander and die. The second law, and then Moses dies. Now the people are ready to enter into the land God promised them. The next sign is for Joshua. He is the military commander. So Joshua is like this. And God brings them to the edge of the Jordan River. Now Moses is dead. And Joshua, I love the description of him, during the tent of meeting where Moses would go to stand before God and meet him face to face, is at this tent that was like outside the camp. Joshua lived there. He lived in the tent of meeting. He is one of the 12 spies. So out of the 12 spies that came back, Joshua and Caleb came back and said, we can do this. And so they didn't die with the rest of the people. Joshua leads the people to the Jordan River. And God tells them, and he brings them to the Jordan River, and it's flood season. So picture any of the rivers around here after some very heavy rains. The Jordan River, it's springtime and it's flooded. And God says, I want you to follow the Ark of the Covenant and have them walk right into the water. And I just picture the guy at the very front. You're walking towards a flooded river, carrying something very heavy on your shoulders, wondering at any point, God, I'm getting closer, God, at any point, you're going to do something spectacular. And as their ankles got wet, God parted the waters, just like he had done at the Red Sea, and they crossed. And so Jordan River, little hop. Jordan River. So after the 12 spies, they wander, they die. Moses gives the second law, Moses dies. Joshua is the commander. Actually, it'd be like this, I guess, walking on the bed of the river, but we'll go like that. Hop over the Jordan River. So Jordan River, then they come to their first battle. And can you imagine, like, when they were back in Egypt, thinking about the promised land, it's something far off, like thinking of going to Disney World or something, right? Land full of milk and honey. They get there and like, oh, there's actual fighting involved. These people are big and terrifying. So they get up to the first battle, and I imagine Joshua stressing out over the whole thing. The city of Jericho had very, very thick walls. And yet God appears to Joshua, sends an angel to him, and says, look, I want you to take all your plans and toss them out and just do exactly what I tell you to do. I think that's a good reminder to us today again. We make our plans just like we did for worship this morning. And really what it's about is doing exactly what God tells us. So God says, look, forget all of your military planning. Just walk around the city a bunch of times for 7 days, and then the walls are going to fall down. And again, through all of this, God is teaching his people to trust him. So the sign for Jericho is Jericho. The walls go like this. The walls fall inward. Every man walks straight in, and they conquer Jericho. So you've got Joshua, Jordan, Jericho. This begins 7 years of conquest. So here, if you want to look on the map, they come around this side. They get to the Jordan River. They jump over it. They get to Jericho. It's defeated. And so the next signs are divide. They go straight through the middle and conquer. Fist down like you're conquering. So let's stand up and do from the beginning. All right, everybody, we start at Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai, law, tabernacle, Levites and priests, offerings, and feasts. I have a cheat sheet. 12 spies. Wanders, dies. Second law, Moses dies. You have Joshua, crosses the Jordan, Jericho, and then divide and conquer. Have a seat. Good job. Joshua leads the people 7 years. They fight all of the major kings and tribes that are there. They defeat the armies. And so finally the time comes. They divide and settle. So that's the next line. Divide and conquer, divide and settle. And what they do is they draw lots and they divide all of the land that God promised them into 12 different allotments for each of the tribes. Except for the Levites. It says that God was their portion. They got no inheritance of land except for God himself. And how the land worked is this. Everybody, it would be like us doing bingo up here and dividing up Thayer and Mammoth. And whatever portion of land you get, that is your family's to keep through all generations. And so you could sell it for a short period of time, but ultimately it would come back to your family. So you pick out your allotment, and for all time from that point on, that is your family's to keep. And so they divide and settle, and the next sign is 12 tribes, like you're chopping up the promised land. Can you imagine how emotional this must have been for the people? They look back to their forefather Abraham. He was just some old guy that God promised would have babies. And God had brought Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and his 12 sons through the land of Egypt, out of slavery, through their disobedience, and now they finally get to live in the land. And I'll just read for you a section out of the book of Joshua. This is at the end of the book of Joshua. And it's like the ending of a movie. Thus the Lord gave to Israel all the land which he swore to give to their fathers. And having taken possession of it, they settled there. And the Lord gave them rest on every side, just as he had sworn to their fathers. Not one of all their enemies had withstood them, for the Lord had given them all their enemies into their hands. Not one of all the good promises which the Lord had made to the house of Israel had failed. all came to pass. Now, if we're watching, right, like one of those movies, this is where it ends. Roll credits. God fulfilled the promises he made to Abraham. Happy stuff happened. They're living in the land that he promised. But that's not the end of it. I've experienced this in my own life. Many times people hit a high point with God. They say, oh, God, He's promised me stuff. He's brought me to this place. It's great. And then, you have to wake up the next morning. And the next day and the next month, and you still got problems. And you still got struggles and temptations and trials. And so the rest of the Old Testament is a story of the struggles of Israel. Remember, Israel means struggles with God. So the book after Joshua is called Judges. So if you have a gavel, pounding on your hand, Judges. And here's how the book of Judges is introduced. And all that generation also were gathered to their fathers. And there arose another generation after them who did not know the Lord, or the work which he had done for Israel. And the people did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and served the Baals, which was a local idol. Again, crushing tragedy. This generation that had gone through, they walked through dry land, they passed through the Jordan River, they saw the walls of Jericho fall down. God had given them everything. They raise up their kids, and something fails to happen. The parents fail to teach their children. Book of Deuteronomy says, raise up your children, teach them these things. Talk about these laws when you go out and when you come in. Talk about them when you wake up and when you go to sleep. Talk about them all the time. Raise up your kids the right way. It fails to happen. So a new generation comes. They weren't there. And so they don't follow. And so what happens is the next period of time, can you guess how many years? 400 years. Default time period. 400 years. So you have the judges for 400 years, and this cycle happens. The people began to worship idols. They didn't obliterate all of the people who lived in the land, so they started to look at their neighbors because they're planting crops and they need the rain to fall. And the neighbors are out there, and what do you guys do? We're making it rain. How can I do that? They begin to follow the idols of all of the people around them. They begin to be influenced by them. Remember the book of Deuteronomy. What does he say is going to happen? Curses. And so what happens after they begin to follow the idols of the people around them? God brings in oppression. Invaders come and conquer portions of the land of Israel. And they live under oppression. Is it because God hates his people? No. He's trying to get their attention, and it works. And so this cycle repeats itself 7 times in the book of Judges. They begin to follow idols. God brings in foreign oppressors. And then when they're oppressed, the people cry out to God. They say, save us. So there's prayer. They say, save us, God. We're being horribly oppressed. Why is this happening? We understand that we've sinned against you. Then God raises up a judge, which is kind of a local ruler at that time. And the judge brings them deliverance. So Samson, most people know him from children's church, real strong guy. Samson was a judge. The people had been oppressed. They cried out to God. God gave them Samson. He delivered them. And then what happens every single time is after that judge dies, they go back to the start of the cycle. The land experiences peace. This happens 7 times in the book of Judges. The land experiences peace. People go back to worshiping idols. God brings in oppression. They say, oh, God, this is really bad. We're sorry. God sends them a judge. Thank you, God, for delivering us. We're going to go back to idols. Over and over and over again for 400 years. And the phrase that describes the book of Judges is this. We'll do the hand signs together. Everyone, like a circle, everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Can you think of a phrase that better describes our society today? In fact, the book of Judges closes with two horrendous stories of just really messed up stuff happening. And it says, you know why this happened? Everybody was doing what was right in their own eyes. So I have an issue with, listen to your heart. Just do whatever you feel is right. No, that's horrible. Every time in human history that happens, people are horrible to each other. Everybody is doing what is right in their own eyes. And so after 400 years, everyone did what was right in their own eyes, except for two exceptions. So after the book of Judges, you have Samuel and Ruth. So everyone did what was right in their own eyes, except for Ruth and Samuel. So again, you'll notice this is a consistent theme throughout the Old Testament. People fail God. They experience consequences. God is faithful, and yet even in the middle of all of that, you have two people described who were faithful to God and served Him. Ruth was a foreigner. If you were here on Wednesday night, Ruth was a Moabitess, the people of Moab, which the Israelites hated. She chose to make the God of the Israelites her own God. She is a story of faithfulness in an unexpected sort. It's kind of ironic, right? God's chosen people are messing up, and so he uses a foreigner to come in and be an example. So the book of Ruth comes and shows that during that time there's still faithfulness. And Samuel was kind of the opposite. He was a child of Israel, and he grew up in the tabernacle itself. And so you'll find his story in the book of 1 Samuel. So that brings us to the end for today. So what we're going to do is we're going to stand up and we're going to start all the way from creation. Practice these at home. Wednesday night, we will go through these again. Your kids, during Wednesday night programming, will go through them again. You may discover that your 5-year-old has a better grasp on them than you do. All right, from the beginning. Creation, fall, flood, nations, Abraham, Dead Sea, Jordan River, Sea of Galilee, Mediterranean, Israel, and the kids Ishmael, Isaac, Esau, Jacob, Joseph, Egypt, Jews, Egypt, 400 years, bondage, Moses, let my people go, plagues, Passover, Red Sea, Mount Sinai. Here we go to today's stuff. Law, tabernacle, Levites and priests, offerings and feasts, 12 spies, wanders, dies. Second law, then Moses dies. Who comes after Moses? Joshua, Jordan, Jericho. Divide and conquer, divide and settle. 12 tribes. Almost to the end. It's okay, I'm a pastor. Judges. 400 years. Remember what happened? Everyone did what was right in their own eyes, except Ruth and Samuel. Give yourselves a hand. By the way, if you see me referring to my notes, it's okay. It's okay. This is to help us remember. So I need to practice as well. Well, all by myself this next week. So I'm going to close with this thought. Now again, I hope, like I said, that you're getting the big picture. You'll notice again on your cheat sheets, I've listed out for you when these books of the Bible are falling. So again, we've only said a few words about Ruth or Samuel, but you'll find their full stories in the book of Ruth and 1 Samuel. This past week has been horrible for anybody who looks at the news. When we look at the world around us, it might remind us of the time of Judges, where you see just a continuing spiral of people turning away from God. People failing to live up to what God has called them to. It may feel as though we live in a world where everybody is just doing their own thing. And yet we are reminded of two things. One, God's promises remain when we are unfaithful. God remained faithful when the people turned back after the spies brought back scary news. God remained faithful during the time of the Judges when they worshiped their neighbors' idols. God will remain faithful to us today. And secondly, there are always people to be found. Even when it feels like everybody is a hypocrite and a liar, and all we see is violence and bloodshed around us. Do not be dismayed. God is greater, and there are still faithful people serving Him. And so if we are to live in a time of darkness, you know what that means? Is that we get to shine all the brighter for it. So I would challenge you not to be overcome by the evil news that you see, but to overcome evil with good. Let's pray. God, as we've gone through this history today, we see your dealings with the people of Israel as they struggled against you. God, as they repeatedly fell short, as they experienced cycles of violence and idolatry. God, even so, we cry out to you for our own country. God, we cry out to you because we see everybody doing what is right in their own eyes. God, we cry out to you because we don't know what else to do. Because we feel powerless when we see the worst of humanity on display. Yet we know you are the God of Abraham. You are the God of promises that you keep. You are the God who's made promises to us that we can securely rest on. You are the God of Joseph, who brings your people through struggles. You are the God of Joshua. You conquer your enemies. You are the God of Ruth, who displays your faithfulness to us if we come to you and make you our God. In Jesus' name.